The dying woman across the hall grabbed my wrist at 20 inches the morning and whispered, "If your nephew asks you to sign anything tomorrow, don't do it, not even if your brother begs you." At first, I thought the morphine had gotten to her. She was just an old woman in a wheelchair, wrapped in a faded quilt, sitting in the dark doorway of a hospice room that smelled like lavender and death. Her voice was thin, almost broken, but her eyes were sharp enough to cut through me. My brother Hollis was dying in the room beside hers. I had driven 11 hours from Tucson to Boise after getting the call that he might not make it through the week. I arrived with 3 shirts and a duffel bag, a toothbrush, and the kind of panic a man feels when the person who raised him is suddenly fading in a hospital bed. For 3 days, I sat beside Hollis while machines hummed and nurses came and went. He was barely 90 pounds by then, his hands trembling whenever he reached for a cup of ice chips. But even through the pain, one name kept leaving his mouth: Cale. His son, my nephew, the boy I had once taught to bait a fishing hook. So when that old woman warned me not to trust him, I almost laughed. Family didn't do things like that. At least, that's what I believed. Before Cale walked in the next morning, carrying a briefcase full of papers. My name is Owen Hartwich. I'm 63 years old. And for most of my life, I believed I was a careful man. Not a smart man in the way people brag about. Not a rich man. Not a man who thought he could outplay the world. Just careful. I worked 38 years as a freight dispatcher for a regional trucking company. My job was built on details. One wrong number. One missed call. One driver sent down the wrong highway. And an entire shipment could fall apart. So I learned to check things twice. Then I checked them a third time just to sleep better at night. Every Sunday morning, I balanced my checkbook with black coffee beside me. I read every contract before I signed it. My wife Marlo used to laugh and say, "Owen, you can turn buying toothpaste into a legal review." She was right. I was careful with strangers, careful with money, careful with every small detail. But I was not careful with family, and that was almost the mistake that cost my brother everything. But Marlo had been gone almost 2 years by then. The house in Tucson had become too quiet after she passed. Her side of the closet still smelled faintly like her perfume. And sometimes, without thinking, I would turn to tell her something before remembering there was no one there. So when the call came about my brother Hollis, I didn't think about work, or distance, or whether I was ready to see him like that. I just went. Hollis was more than my brother. He was the first man who ever protected me. When our father left in 1968, Hollis was only 12. But he somehow became the steady one. He taught me how to throw a curveball, how to shave without cutting my chin, and how to stand up straight when life tried to bend me. That was the man dying in that hospice bed. And because I loved him, I made the most dangerous mistake of my life. I assumed everyone else loved him the same way. Hollis was 4 years older than me, but in every way that mattered. He had been more like a father than a brother. When our dad walked out in the spring of 1968, Hollis was only 12 years old. I was 8. He was still a boy himself. But somehow, from that day on, he became the man of the house. He made sure I got to school. He taught me how to tie a proper knot, how to throw a curveball, how to keep my fists down unless I truly needed them. He never complained about it. Not once. That was just who Hollis was. Steady, quiet, decent. Years later, he married Patricia, built a cabin with his own hands near the lake in Coeur d'Alene, and raised 2 children there. His daughter, Bryony, grew into a kind, hard-working woman. She lived in Oregon, taught at a community college, and had 2 children of her own. His son, Cale, was different. Not bad. At least not in a way any of us admitted out loud. Just smoother, louder, always dressed a little too sharp, always talking about deals, investments, opportunities. and people who owed him favors. He worked in commercial insurance up in Spokane. And whenever he came around, he had that polished way of making every sentence sound reasonable. Hollis loved both his children. But when I arrived at the hospice and saw my brother reduced to bones under a white blanket, the first name he whispered was not Brianni's. It was Cale's. And the fear in his eyes told me that name did not bring him comfort. By the time I reached Hollis's room, the brother I remembered was almost gone. The man who used to carry sacks of cement over one shoulder, who once built an entire back porch by himself in the middle of July, was lying under a thin white blanket with his wrists looking no thicker than broom handles. His skin had turned the color of old paper. Every breath sounded like it had to climb out of him. But his eyes were still there. Tired. Yes. Sunken. Clouded by pain medicine. But still Hollis. When I stepped beside the bed and said his name, his fingers moved against the sheet. I reached down and took his hand, and he gripped me with what little strength he had left. "Owen," he whispered. "I'm here," I said. "I drove all night. I'm right here." For a moment, I thought he might smile. Instead, his eyes moved past me, toward the door. "Where's the boy?" I thought he meant a nurse. Or maybe one of Bryony's kids. "What boy?" His lips trembled. "Cale." I told him Cale was supposed to arrive the next morning. That the nurse said he had called ahead. That everything was going to be fine. But Hollis didn't relax. He turned his face toward the ceiling and closed his eyes like I had given him the wrong answer. A tear slipped down the side of his face and disappeared into the pillow. That should have told me something. But grief makes you explain away things you should question. I told myself he was just afraid of dying before seeing his son. I told myself he was worried about family being divided after he was gone. I told myself anything except the truth that was sitting right in front of me. Over the next 3 days, it got worse. Sometimes Hollis would wake suddenly and whisper words I couldn't understand. Sometimes he would look at the door like he expected someone dangerous to walk through it. Once, while a nurse adjusted his line, I heard him mumble, "Should have changed it. Should have changed the will." I leaned closer and asked, "Changed what?" "Hollis," but he only shut his eyes. And I let the silence answer for him. I didn't understand the warning until the 4th night. It was a little after 2 in the morning. The hallway outside Hollis's room was quiet, except for the soft beeping of machines and the rubber soles of nurses moving somewhere far down the corridor. I had stepped out only because the night nurse needed to change Hollis's line. And I needed coffee badly enough that my hands were shaking. That was when I saw her. Mrs. Esther Peeberly was sitting in the doorway of her room, wrapped in the same faded quilt, her wheelchair half in shadow. Her room was dark behind her. Only the hallway light touched her face. She lifted one thin finger, not waving, calling me closer. I walked over carefully, not wanting to wake anyone. "Sit down," she whispered. There was something in her voice that made me obey. I pulled a visitor's chair beside her and sat. For a long moment, she only looked at me. Her eyes were pale gray, but clear. Too clear for a woman people might call confused. "Your nephew arrives tomorrow," she said. I felt my stomach tighten. "How do you know that?" "Because your brother said it in his sleep." I didn't answer. She leaned forward slightly, her hands gripping the quilt over her knees. "He kept saying he should have changed the will. He kept saying the boy was coming. And he was afraid." The hallway suddenly felt colder. Then Esther said the words I would hear in my head for the rest of my life. "Whatever Cale tells you tomorrow, don't believe it. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. And if you can drive home tonight, do it." I thanked her politely. Then I walked back to my brother's room and told myself she was only a lonely old woman with a broken heart. That was my first mistake. Cale arrived a little before 11 the next morning. I saw him before he saw me. He came down the hospice hallway in a charcoal gray jacket. No tie. One hand carrying a leather briefcase. The other holding his phone like he had just stepped out of an important meeting instead of into the place where his father was dying. His hair had gone a little salt and pepper at the temples, and his shoes were polished so clean they looked out of place against the dull hospital floor. "Uncle Owen," he said when he saw me. Then he hugged me. Too long. His arms were around me, but his eyes were already past my shoulder, scanning the hallway, the nurse's station, the door to Hollis's room. Then his hand shifted slightly on the leather briefcase, like he was making sure it was still there. At the time, I told myself grief made everything feel strange, but there was something practiced about the way he held me, something almost staged. He smelled like expensive aftershave and airport coffee. "I got here as fast as I could," he said, but he did not ask if his father was in pain. He did not ask if Hollis had eaten. He asked who had been in the room. I nodded and patted his back, because that was what an uncle was supposed to do. Inside the room, Hollis was awake, but only barely. Cale moved to the bedside and took his father's hand. He lowered his voice. He said all the right things. "I'm here. Dad, you don't have to worry. I'll take care of everything." Those words should have comforted me. Instead, I watched Hollis's eyes. They didn't soften when Cale spoke. They moved from Cale to me, then back again. Wet and desperate, like he was trying to warn me but couldn't find enough air to shape the words. Once, his mouth opened. His lips trembled. Nothing came out. Cale leaned closer and said, "Don't strain yourself, Dad." And Hollis closed his mouth. That was the moment Esther's warning returned to me. "Don't sign anything." After 10 minutes, Cale stood and rubbed both hands down his face like a man carrying a heavy burden. "Uncle," he said softly, "can we step out for a minute? We need to talk about the arrangements." "About after." He didn't say inheritance. He didn't say money. But when he picked up that briefcase, I knew whatever was inside it had been waiting longer than he had. We sat in the hospice cafeteria with 2 cups of coffee neither of us touched. Cale placed his briefcase on the chair beside him, not on the floor. Like whatever was inside, it was too important to be out of reach. Then he folded his hands on the table and looked at me with the calm, serious face of a man who had already practiced this conversation in the mirror. "Uncle Owen," he said, "Dad's been worried about the cabin." The cabin. Hollis's place in Coeur d'Alene. The one he had built board by board back when lakefront land was still something a working man could afford. I had seen him hammer nails into that porch with sweat running down his neck and sawdust stuck to his arms. That cabin was not just property. It was Hollis's whole life made out of cedar and stone. Cale sighed, like the weight of responsibility was crushing him. "He doesn't want it tied up in probate," he said. "If we don't handle this now, lawyers will eat half of it. It could take years." Dad asked me to prepare a simple transfer, just to keep things clean. "Transfer to who?" I asked. "To me," Cale said, almost too quickly. "So I can manage everything. Sell it if I have to. Pay final expenses. Make sure the family is taken care of." Every word sounded reasonable. That was the dangerous part. Then he leaned forward. "There's a notary coming this afternoon. Dad can barely hold a pen. But if we catch him while he's lucid, we can fix this before it becomes a mess. I just need you there as a witness." And suddenly, Esther's voice whispered through my mind again. "Don't sign anything." I did not accuse him. Not then. A younger version of me might have slammed my hand on the table and demanded to know what he was really doing. But grief had made me quiet, and Esther's warning had made me careful. So I only said, "I'd like to see the paperwork first." Cale blinked once. It was so quick most people would have missed it. But I saw it. The small pause. The slight tightening around his mouth. The way his fingers stopped moving on the edge of his coffee cup. Then the smile came back. "Of course," he said. "Whatever makes you comfortable." But his voice had changed. Not much. Just enough. He told me the papers were upstairs in his bag, and we could look at them later. I said I wanted to be present when the notary came. He said that was fine too, though his eyes had gone flat in a way I didn't like. At 4 that afternoon, A man in a brown suit walked into the hallway, carrying a leather folder. Cale stood up before the man had even finished saying his name. "That's our notary," he said. "Our notary. Not Dad's. Not the family's. Our?" I followed them into Hollis's room. My brother was awake, but barely. His eyes moved slowly from Cale to the documents, then to me. There was fear in them now. Not confusion. Fear. The notary placed a stack of papers on the rolling tray above Hollis's bed. Cale immediately reached for a pen. "Hold on," I said. "I want to read everything before anyone signs." The room went still. The notary looked at Cale. Cale looked at me. Then, slowly, the notary handed me the papers. The first page was what Cale had described: a quitclaim deed transferring the cabin to him. But the stack was too thick for one simple transfer. I lifted the first page. Underneath it was another document. A power of attorney giving Cale control over every financial account Hollis had. My fingers went cold. I lifted the next page. A life insurance beneficiary change. $400,000. With Cale's name typed where Bryony's used to be. The papers had been arranged in the exact order a trusting man would sign them without noticing what came underneath. That was when I understood. This was not paperwork. This was not protection. This was a robbery dressed up as family business. I looked at the papers in my hand, then at Cale. For the first time since he had arrived, he did not look like a grieving son. He looked like a man whose plan had been interrupted. "What are these?" I asked. Cale gave a small laugh. But there was no warmth in it. "Uncle, they're just standard documents. Protective measures." "Protective for who?" His jaw tightened. "The power of attorney is in case Dad can't manage things over the next few days," he said. "And the insurance form is just to correct something Dad wanted corrected." I held up the third page. "You changed the beneficiary from Bryony to yourself." Cale's eyes flicked to the notary, then back to me. "Bree agreed to it," he said. That was the moment the room changed. I looked at my brother lying in that bed. Too weak to speak. Too sick to defend the truth. Then I looked at my nephew, standing 3 feet away with a pen in his hand, trying to steal from a dying man before the body was even cold. "Call her," I said. Cale blinked. "What, call Bryony? Right now? Put her on speaker." He gave me that smooth, tired smile again. "Uncle, you've been here too long. You're exhausted." I took out my own phone. "Then I'll call her. This time." His face changed completely. The smile disappeared. The softness vanished. And for one cold second, I saw the real man underneath. Not my nephew. Not Hollis's boy. Just a thief who had run out of time. Bryony answered on the second ring. Her voice sounded distant and tired, like she had been crying before I called. I could hear children somewhere in the background. A television turned low. The ordinary sounds of a life that had no idea it was seconds away from being shattered. "Uncle Owen," she said. "Is Dad okay?" I looked at Hollis. His eyes were open now, fixed on me. "He's still with us," I said carefully. "But I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me plainly." Cale stepped toward me. "Uncle, don't do this," he said under his breath. I raised my hand without looking at him. "Bree," I said, "did you agree to have your name removed from your father's life insurance policy?" Silence. Not confusion. Not hesitation. The kind of silence that comes when someone hears a sentence so wrong their mind has to build a place to put it. What she whispered, "The policy through his old union." I said, $400,000. There's a document here changing the beneficiary from you to Cale. Behind me. Cale let out a sharp breath. That is not what this is. He snapped. Bree, listen to me. Uncle Owen is upset. He doesn't understand the situation. But Bryony's voice changed. It went from frightened to cold. Cale, she said. What did you do? He tried to laugh. Nothing. This is just paperwork Dad wanted handled. I never agreed to anything. She said, I don't even know what policy he's talking about. The room went dead quiet. Even the notary stopped moving. Then Bryony said, louder now. Uncle Owen, do not sign anything. Do you hear me? Don't let Dad sign anything. I'm getting on a flight tonight. Cale's face hardened. The mask was gone now. He looked at me with anger. Not grief. You have no idea what I've done for this family. He said, Dad owes me. I've been covering things for years. I deserve. Get out. I said. His mouth opened. I stepped between him and my brother's bed. Get out of this room before I call security. For a second, nobody breathed. Then Cale gathered the papers, snapped his briefcase shut, and walked out. Hollis started crying without making a sound. I took his hand and whispered, It's all right. I stopped it. After Cale left, the room felt different. Not peaceful exactly. A hospice room is never truly peaceful when someone you love is dying inside it. But the air no longer felt poisoned. The papers were gone. The pen was gone. The man who had tried to turn my brother's final hours into a business opportunity was gone too. I sat on the edge of Hollis's bed and held his hand. He was crying silently, tears slipping from the corners of his eyes into the pillow. He tried to speak, but all that came out was a broken breath. Don't, I whispered. You don't have to explain anything. His fingers tightened around mine. Just once. But I understood it. Bryony arrived late that night, pale and shaking, still wearing the clothes she must have thrown on before running to the airport. The moment she saw her father, she covered her mouth and started crying. She climbed into the chair beside his bed and took his other hand. For the next 31 hours, we stayed with him. We talked to him even when we weren't sure he could hear us. Bryony told him about her children. I told him about old summers at the lake, about the porch he built, about the way he had held our family together after our father walked out. Cale never came back. Just before sunrise on Wednesday morning, Hollis opened his eyes one last time. He looked at Bryony. Then he looked at me. And then he was gone. No papers signed. No wishes stolen. No final betrayal left unfinished. The week after the funeral, Bryony and I drove to Coeur d'Alene to meet Hollis's real lawyer. Her name was Marjorie Kestrel. She was a small woman with silver hair, sharp glasses, and the kind of office that smelled like old paper and black coffee. Hollis had used her for almost 20 years. Taxes, property questions, his will, everything important. When we sat across from her desk, she opened a thick folder with my brother's name on the tab. I'm sorry for your loss, she said gently. Then she pulled out the real will, page by page. She showed us what Hollis had actually wanted. The cabin was never supposed to go directly to Cale. It was to be sold, and the money was to be split equally between Cale and Bryony. 50-50. No favorites. No secret promise. No special arrangement made behind anyone's back. The life insurance policy was even clearer. All $400,000 were meant for Bryony. Not because Hollis loved Cale less, but because Bryony had 2 children, a teacher's salary, and no safety net. Cale had always told everyone he was doing fine. Hollis had believed him. Then Marjorie showed us the savings account. About $86,000. 1/3 was for Bryony. 1/3 was for Cale. And the final third was meant to create a small scholarship at the trade school, where Hollis had learned his craft as a young man. That was my brother, even dying. He was thinking about some kid he would never meet. Marjorie looked over the top of her glasses and said, the documents Cale brought to the hospice would have overturned nearly all of this. I felt my stomach turn. The cabin would have gone to him outright. The insurance would have gone to him. And with that power of attorney, he could have emptied the savings account before Hollis was even buried. Bryony started crying quietly beside me. I just stared at the folder. Because for the first time, I understood exactly what Esther had stopped. She hadn't saved a piece of property. She had saved my brother's final voice. The following Saturday, I drove back to Boise. Not for Hollis this time. For Esther. Bryony had told me I didn't have to go. She said she could mail a card to the hospice. Maybe ask a nurse to pass along my thanks. But that didn't feel like enough. You don't mail gratitude to the person who kept your brother's final wishes from being stolen. So I bought a small box of pastries from a bakery Bryony recommended, wrote a card by hand, and drove back to the place I had been trying not to remember. The hospice looked the same from the parking lot. Same low building. Same quiet windows. Same smell of lavender the moment the front doors opened, trying its best to cover what every person inside already knew. The nurse at the desk recognized me. I asked for Mrs. Esther Pebberly. Her face changed before she said a word. That was how I knew. She passed Thursday morning, the nurse said softly, in her sleep. For a moment, I just stood there with the pastry box in my hands, feeling foolish for bringing food to a woman who was already gone. I looked down the hallway toward her room. The door was open. The bed had been stripped. The wheelchair was gone. There was no quilt in the doorway. No pale gray eyes watching the hall. No thin voice telling strangers the truth they needed to hear. I barely knew her. I said. The nurse nodded. Then she said, "She left something for you." And somehow, that hurt more than if she had left nothing at all. The nurse came back with a small white envelope. My name was written across the front in shaky handwriting. Mr. Hartwich. Not Owen. Not Sir. Just my last name. Spelled close enough by a woman who had only heard it once. I took it outside because I didn't want to open it under the fluorescent lights of that front desk. I sat on a cold bench near the parking lot, with the pastry box beside me and the wind moving through the bare November trees. Inside was one folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was thin and uneven, but every word felt deliberate. She wrote that her son's name was Tomlin. In the spring of 2009, he had convinced her to sign a few papers after her husband died. He told her it was only to simplify things. He said he was protecting her. He said family should trust family. So she signed. By the time she understood what she had done, the house was gone. Her savings were gone. The wedding rings her husband had given her were gone too. And when there was nothing left to take, her son stopped calling. Then Esther wrote the sentence that made me put the letter down and cover my mouth. The worst part was not losing everything. The worst part was finding out later that other people had suspected him for years and said nothing. She had asked one of them why. The answer was simple. It wasn't my place. Esther wrote that those 4 words had stayed with her longer than the betrayal itself. Not my place. As if silence was kindness. As if looking away made a person innocent. So she made herself a promise. If she ever saw someone walking toward the same trap, she would speak. Even if it was awkward. Even if she was wrong. Even if the person hated her for it. I don't know if you listened. She wrote. But if you did, I hope you are safe. I sat there in the cold for a long time. Because Esther Pebberly had lost everything once. And with the last strength she had, she made sure I didn't. For a while, I thought the hospice room was the end of it. Cale disappeared after the funeral. He didn't come to the reading of the will. He didn't call Bryony. He didn't send flowers. The only thing he sent me was a long email a month later, full of polished excuses and wounded pride. He said I had humiliated him. He said I had destroyed the family. He said Hollis would have wanted us to stay together. I read it once. Then I deleted it. But the truth has a way of crawling out from under closed doors. 6 months after Hollis died, I received a letter from a woman in Spokane named Dolores. Her father had passed away. And while going through his things, she found a notebook filled with names of people who owed him money. One name stood out. Cale Hartwich. Dolores said Cale had borrowed $47,000 from her father and never paid back a dime. Her father had been too ashamed to tell anyone while he was alive. That letter opened the floodgates. Bryony called Marjorie. Marjorie started asking questions. And soon, the quiet, respectable life Cale had pretended to live began falling apart. There were debts, civil lawsuits, elderly clients who had trusted him, friends of Hollis who had lent him money and never seen it again. And behind all of it was the same thing: gambling, desperation, and a man who always needed one more score to stay ahead of the people chasing him. The cabin scheme had not been a mistake. It had been his last big move. 19 months after my brother died, Cale went to trial. Not for what he tried to steal from Hollis, but for what he had stolen from others. He was sentenced to 6 years. And for the first time in a long time, he had nowhere left to run. Cale went to prison. But prison did not fix what he broke. That is something people don't tell you about justice. It can stop a person. It can punish a person. It can put a locked door between them and the people they hurt. But it cannot hand you back the years you wasted trusting them. For a while, Bryony and I didn't talk about Cale much. We talked about Hollis. We talked about the cabin. We talked about paperwork, lawyers, bank accounts, and all the quiet little duties that fall on the living after someone dies. Then, slowly, we started talking about ordinary things. She called me one Sunday afternoon just to ask how Tucson weather was. I called her the next week to ask how her kids were doing in school. Before long, Sunday became our day. Every week, sometime after lunch, my phone would ring, and there she was. Not my niece I barely knew anymore. Family. Real family. The kind that shows up after the damage is done and helps you sweep the glass off the floor. That Easter, she drove down to Tucson with her 2 children. Her youngest was shy and hid behind her coat for the first 20 minutes. Her oldest, 11 years old, asked me if I had ever seen a rattlesnake in real life. I took them to the Desert Museum. We watched hummingbirds move like sparks through the air. We ate green chili cheeseburgers at a little place Marlo and I used to love. For the first time in almost 2 years, my house did not feel like it was holding its breath. That evening, Bryony's oldest drew me a picture of a roadrunner. It is still on my refrigerator. Sometimes I stand in the kitchen with my coffee and look at that drawing, and I think about how close we came to losing more than money. Cale tried to steal an inheritance, but what he almost stole was the last bridge between the people Hollis left behind. And somehow, after all of it, Bryony and I built that bridge back. About a year after Cale's trial, Bryony called me with an idea. At first, she sounded nervous, even saying it out loud. She said her church in Oregon had a small group for seniors. People who came once a week for coffee, prayer, and conversation. Some of them lived alone. Some had children who only appeared when money was involved. Some were too proud to admit they were scared. What if we told them what happened, she asked. I was quiet for a long moment, because telling the story meant opening the wound again. It meant saying Cale's name. It meant remembering Hollis in that bed, Esther in that dark doorway, and those papers stacked neatly like a knife waiting to be used. But then I thought of Esther's letter. Not my place. Those 3 words had ruined her life more quietly than her son ever did. So I said yes. The first time we spoke, only 12 people came. Bryony told the legal part. I told the hospice part. I told them about the notary, the life insurance form, and the dying woman across the hall who saved us by speaking up. When we finished, nobody moved. Then one elderly man raised his hand and said, "My grandson keeps asking me to add him to my bank account." After that, the stories came one by one. A daughter who needed one quick signature. A nephew who offered to manage the bills. A son who got angry whenever anyone asked questions. That was when I realized what happened to us was not rare. It was happening everywhere. So once a month, in Oregon and in Tucson, we kept telling Esther's story. Because sometimes the warning someone needs is not loud. Sometimes it is just one honest voice saying, Slow down. Don't sign yet. I used to believe betrayal announced itself. I thought it came with shouting, broken glass, slammed doors, and obvious lies. I thought danger would look like danger. I thought the people who could hurt you most would arrive wearing the face of an enemy. But they don't always. Sometimes they arrive in a charcoal jacket, smelling like aftershave, carrying a briefcase, saying, "I'm just trying to help." Sometimes they call it paperwork. Sometimes they call it protection. Sometimes they say there is no time. The lawyers will take everything. The family will suffer. And if you really love the person lying in that bed, you need to sign now. That is what I want you to remember. Pressure is not love. A person who truly cares about you will let you breathe. They will let you read. They will let you call someone else. They will wait until morning if waiting protects you. But a person who needs you confused will rush you. I almost looked at Cale and saw the 7-year-old boy I taught to bait a hook instead of the grown man standing in front of me with stolen intentions in his hands. That is the hard part about family. We don't just see who they are. We see who they used to be. I still think about Esther Peberly whenever I pass that hospice in Boise. Her room faced the road. And every time I visit Bryony and the kids, I slow down and look up at that window. I never knew her. Not really. We spoke only twice. She gave me one warning and one letter. But somehow, she became family in a way some of my own blood never was. Because family is not always the person who shares your name. Sometimes family is the stranger who sees danger before you do and refuses to stay silent. So if something feels wrong, slow down, take the paper home, photograph it, call someone who gains nothing from your decision. Ask the ugly question. The cost of being wrong is a little awkwardness. But the cost of being right and staying silent can be someone's home, someone's savings, someone's final wish, or someone's entire life. The people who love you can wait until morning. The people who don't will demand your signature tonight. So tell me in the comments who was your Esther who told you the truth when nobody else would.